Well, welcome to Putting LDS Themes in Fiction. We have a great group of panelists here today, and I for one, am quite excited to have this conversation. So, without further ado, let's have everybody give a little introduction, and then we'll start with some questions.
My name is Dave Butler. I'm published by Knopf and Bain, and Mormon born and raised here in the Valley. Grew up over about a mile from here. Went to LTUE 4 and 5 when I was a kid, and thought they were weird enough I didn't come back for about 20 years. But happy to be here today. Very excited about this subject, actually.
I've been to 34 of the 36 LTUEs. The only two I missed were when I was on my mission in Germany. Yeah, I'm Scott Parkin. My fiction bona fides are I've published about 50 short stories in various markets. I've got a couple of novels, one finished, one in progress, and another one on the hopper. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Stories for Nerds podcast. My Mormon bona fides, I've won exactly half of all of the prizes ever offered by the BYU Studies Fiction Contest. They had it 1 year. I got 2 of the 4 prizes. I was the awards coordinator for the Association for Mormon Letters for about 4 years, and I've had a chance to meet some very interesting people. And I've been involved with AML for about 15 years until basically, we'll talk about that later in the panel. But anyway, and I've been fascinated with both Mormon literature as Mormon literature and Mormon themes in literature. And there's a really interesting conversation to be had about that we'll try to have later.
Cool. And I'm Brandon Mull, and I write fantasy adventure stuff, Fablehaven, and that kind of thing. It's middle grade Harry Potter fantasy, basically, is the kind of stuff that I write. And then I'm a Mormon guy, and even like my publisher is indirectly sort of Mormon, which is funny. At least, well, I'm published by Simon & Schuster and Scholastic, but I'm also published by Shadow Mountain, and Shadow Mountain is a division of Deseret Book, and yeah. So there's stuff to talk about.
My name is Josi Russell. I write science fiction, published science fiction and space opera mostly, and also a Mormon girl. So those are my credentials.
Anyone here not LDS?
It's going to be an interesting conversation for you.
No, like, because that'd be all right. I mean, I think I would sit on a panel of Catholic stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
I would too.
The principles would still cross all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think that actually
Yeah.
I think that actually leads us into a great first question. I think it's good to kind of start out with a baseline. What are, according to panelists, some of these LDS themes we're talking about?
Somebody else started.
Well, there's lots of ways to attack this, right? And like, so I'll say one aspect. One aspect is just, this ties into the publisher thing I was mentioning. Like Shadow Mountain was created by Deseret Book because Deseret Book looked at themselves and said, we're just Mormons talking to Mormons, right? We're just Mormons talking to Mormons. So like, let's create something where we put out fiction that's true to kind of LDS standards, right? But isn't necessarily inherently Mormon. Isn't inherently LDS. Like there's no Book of Mormon message. There's no there's no direct thing. And so this is how I'm part of their early waves of that experiment. And so one aspect of being LDS without even being overtly LDS in any way, like there are LDS themes in my fiction. But they're not there deliberately or by mandate. They're not super obvious. There's no like, it's not, I don't think I've written anything that's full on allegorical or something. But definitely present with me is that I would want a Mormon kid to read my books and find nothing that was like particularly offensive to them. You know what I mean? Or a Mormon parent to read my books and find nothing particularly offensive to them. It's one aspect of what I'm trying to do, and also to make it cool and fun and good, and yet palatable to an LDS audience?
So let me give you a different kind of example. Actually, one of the things that I sort of, I'll be careful how I say this. The title of the panel, putting LDS themes into fiction, makes me a little nervous. LDS implies the official church. It implies correlation. And I would prefer people not see it that way. I would prefer they said Mormon themes. That's a broader word. I would prefer people wrote prophetically without correlation. I worry that if we write correlated fiction, it will sound like Sunday school. We will say, obey, join the church, do your own teaching. And no one will read it, and with good reason. But Mormonism is vast. Its philosophical scope is eternal. You're an eternal being with an eternal destiny you don't know yet. But a map and an eternal past you don't know, but maybe can someday discover. And Joseph Smith invites us to learn truth from all sources, and there's a wonderful call to adventure in there for a writer, which is to find truth and to share it in that context. So I'm sure there are children who would be offended by reading my stuff. But let me give you an example of writing about Mormonism, writing with Mormon themes means some of my books. So, Witchy Eye is an epic fantasy novel. It's the first in a 6-book series. Some of the themes include what happens when an esoteric tradition is broken. What happens? How is revelation received? What does revelation look like when it transforms from being revelation into being a church? How do you encode sacred information so that it can pass hidden for generations without being noticed under the eyes of people who are hostile to it and yet survive? And frankly, I think I've got more readers in Texas than I do in Utah. And Mormon doesn't appear in there, and there is no preaching, and yet it's gigantically Mormon.
Yeah. So it's always an interesting question because not so much Mormon themes, but the question of is a work of Mormon fiction is something that I dealt with a lot at AML, and there was a lot of disagreement with that. And here's my thing. With the exception of one short story wherein I posited a Mormon vampire and justified it under the doctrine.
Was it Cain? Was it Cain?
No. No.
Good. That would have been too easy.
No, I'm not going there. He's Sasquatch. That's okay. I don't write Mormon stories in the sense of being about Mormons or about the church or about anything else, right? Brandon writes straight up fantasy. And I do the same thing with science fiction and fantasy. I've got the most Mormon flavored ancient Chinese dragons you've ever met. Because there's a worldview that I can't get away from because it's what's in my head. So when I go into an imaginative moment, I can think outside my cultural frame. But I generally don't because there's enough interesting weirdness in my culture to use. I'm going to mention one title, and I think you're in it, actually.
Oh.
Monsters and Mormons?
Oh, no, didn't make that.
You're not in that
one.
Yeah. This Mormon vampire story was supposed to go into that, and I didn't get it written in time. So there is an anthology about yay big. It has the ugliest cover in the history of publishing. Second ugliest cover in the history of publishing.
2 sister missionaries being chased by a tentacle.
By a tentacled creature. And it's a fabulous anthology because what it does is it says, like you were talking about, Dave, getting away from correlation, just saying let your Mormon weirdness find expression by whatever method you choose. So if that means tentacled aliens chasing sister missionaries, great. If that means a graphic novel about a golem created about Porter Rockwell as a golem, great. And it's really fun because you see so many different ways of thinking about our heritage, our culture, our history, and about telling stories that take advantage of that without being necessarily where you're not trying to justify or condemn the institutional church.
Right.
And that's where I think the fun of Mormon themes comes from. Is so much interesting. Right, Brandon's talking about this eternal perspective. Well, gee, Brandon Sanderson has made a career writing about eternal perspectives. Okay? That's what we are. It's what we do. And that's odd because it's the ultimate science fiction concept, right?
But by the way, I'm actually, Immortal Works currently has a submissions call open for Mormon steampunk. If you're not aware of it, April 1st is the deadline. The only requirements are that it be Mormon and steampunk. My website is davidjohnbutler.com. It's there on my blog or on Immortal Works'. But you should, even if you don't submit, give it a try. Try and write some Mormon steampunk.
Do it, right? And let yourself be uncorrelated because it's a lot of fun. But, we're the group who can read Arthur C. Clarke debunking religion because, after all, God is just a super evolved man. And all the Mormons in the room are saying, yeah. What's subversive about that? With the exception that he says God's a technically evolved man and we say God's a morally advanced man. Close enough, right? But that's kind of the fun.
Yeah. I think it's interesting on the panel, none of us are necessarily, other than your one story, necessarily, our work isn't overtly LDS. And I think one of the things that writers need to think about and that we as LDS writers can think about is that when we write to, as Scott said, justify or condemn anything, often we lose sight of great craft. And I think that's one of the first problems with looking at putting themes, as Dave said, themes in our fiction. Write the fiction and the themes will emerge. The themes, your worldview, those kinds of things will emerge. But you focus on the craft, not on putting in the theme.
But you decide your audience too, right? If you're writing a story that says the church is true, you narrow your audience. If you write a story that says, look, here's a story that finds the universal things in humanity and it's got Mormon elements, which may be standards, maybe Orson Scott Card retold story of Joseph Smith, right? Maybe whatever. And you can reach a bigger audience, and maybe you don't convince them to join the church. That's okay. That's not the goal, But you find a common humanity, and you together move forward on your journey.
Yeah, and there's a lot of fun because you can do all kinds. There's all kinds of ways to do it. So you look at a short story. I forgot what I was talking about. Sorry, checking me out. Somebody else talk. I'll remember.
You good?
Old, gray hair. Not my fault. I blame it on the meds.
I like doing, I'm always looking for truth, right? Like as we write stories, and we talk a lot about trying to be an honest writer, right? And an honest writer means you're trying to create these authentically human, relatable moments and characters so that a reader can care and so that a reader can perhaps even learn from a fabricated experience, right? Like Stephen King, fiction is the truth inside the lie, right? Like we can talk about true things even in a fantasy environment. And so when I find that when I have some of my ancient and wise characters who are supposed to know a lot of truth, I lean on truth as I understand it. You know what I mean? I can't write a truth greater than the truth that I understand. And the truth I understand is shaped a lot by LDS stuff. And so, whereas I don't get as specific as to talk about God or a prophet, but the truths that I know and that feel real to me and that I've learned through my life and my experiences as an LDS guy, as an LDS person, those truths are the truths I lean on when I'm having my characters learn truth, right? And so, inherently, there will be some LDS flavor to that truth. Does that make sense? And I'm not talking like there's going to be 3 degrees of glory. Nothing that's quite that specific, right? But there, so it's not straight up doctrinal, but but like there's a lot of truth that isn't necessarily those little specific doctrinal details, right? Like truth about being human and truth about et cetera. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just agreeing passively, sorry.
Oh, and I had a thought, like I thought you were going to leave on them.
Oh, no, I'll wait for it.
Okay.
All right, we have another question about some of your favorite examples of LDS themes in science fiction and fantasy. Anything that the panelists want to add there?
Let me give you a short story by a guy named Stephen Peck. Let's see if I can remember the title. No, it's happening to me again. It's a 4-page short about an AI that wants to be baptized.
You're not thinking about Eric Stone's Space Whales,
No, Whalians is a different
who
story.
want to be baptized.
No. This is a different, because the problem is, of course, there's no. It's a decentralized intelligence. There's no body to dunk.
Vicarious.
Is proxy baptism for a living person. Right? And to me, that is the perfect Mormon short story accessible to any audience anywhere, because it's self-contained, the idea is clear, it's a problem that we can all get our minds around. And for Mormons especially, we're like, yeah, we know about that. And there's that extra layer of giggle in the story, because we can go there and do that.
Right. I mean, something I could throw out, like, it's obvious to think of things like maybe Orson Scott Card when he's rewriting,
Yep.
you know, like Book of
Or
Mormon
Book of
stuff.
Mormon, yep.
Tales of Earth.
Homecoming series.
The Homecoming stuff, or like the Alvin Maker stuff. You know, Alvin Maker. If you haven't read that stuff in your LDS, you should probably peek at it. Like Alvin Maker is a fictionalized Joseph Smith, and Homecoming is a fictionalized Book of Mormon. Like using a lot of just the straight story, but reimagining it in a different environment.
You mean Mayfly is somehow...
There's a chance, yeah. But like, what's actually fun about, like, I mean, since I mentioned it, I'll mention it more, but like, something like Homecoming, what's fun about that is, you know, like that whole first book is maybe the first, like 8 chapters of the Book of Mormon, or, you know, it's not like it's a huge chunk of the Book of Mormon turned into a novel. It's a small chunk of the Book of Mormon where it's like so expanded on what these characters might have been thinking and feeling, and you almost feel like you've read this fictionalized, expanded version of what Nephi might have been dealing with, even though it's got sci-fi elements.
Yeah.
The emotional elements track pretty much with what Nephi might have been having to think about, as his father wanted him to leave this city, and, you know, all those details. But what I was going to mention was. Even stuff like Narnia, like I see so much, like it can have a Christian theme, and guess what? A lot of that is LDS theme, you know what I mean? And like there's all sorts of stuff I learned about prayer from watching Star Wars. You know, like I think probably like in Star Wars when he's in like the chute, like heading toward to blow up the Death Star that first time, and like it's like reach out with your feelings, Luke, or stretch out with your feelings, Luke. Like as a kid, that was my aha on prayer. Like, oh, stretch out with my feelings. Okay, that makes more sense than the way I've had it explained to me. Does that make, you know what I mean? Like, and so like reach out with my feelings. And like, and it's dumb because it's like I didn't believe in the Force, but I took some idea from the Force and applied it to me and said like, yeah, reach out with my feelings. I can get my head around that. That feels like what prayer should be, maybe, kind of. You know what I mean?
Let me give you a spectacularly successful Catholic example. And if you were in the mythology panel yesterday, I apologize, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. Tom Shippey succeeded J.R.R. Tolkien at the chair at Oxford for Old English Studies, whatever. And he wrote a book on Tolkien called J.R.R. Tolkien, unsurprisingly. And there's this part where he quotes a letter from Tolkien. Tolkien writes, Tolkien was profoundly Catholic. He was 7 days a week, go to Mass, Catholic. He was orphaned as a boy and raised by a priest, Catholic. Okay, he was Catholic. And at one point, Shippey excerpts a letter he's written to, Tolkien's written to a Jesuit friend. He says, I'm afraid no one will like this book. It is way too Catholic. Which we miss. But let me just point out a thing or two. Sam wakes up in the halls of the healing in Gondor, right? They've succeeded. And he wakes up and he's talking, he meets Gandalf again. And Gandalf, they're talking, and Gandalf says, the men of Gondor will forever after remember the 25th of March, where that is the day when Sauron fell. Now, Tolkien was a medievalist. And in the English medieval Catholic calendar, March 25th was the day of the crucifixion. Which means, Tolkien could have picked any day, right? He picked March 25th. Which means that for J.R.R. Tolkien, the day that Gollum took the great flaw in the world, the ring, and threw himself into the pit of fire on the mountain and died, is the same day that Christ was crucified on Calvary. Which means that the man of sorrows, acquainted with sin, in whom there was no beauty that we should desire him, is Gollum. Right? Is Gollum. And Frodo comes to resemble Gollum over the journey because he is the Christian trying to walk the same hard path that Christ walks. And yet when you hear people talk, even Tom Shippey, right, says, I don't know what he's talking about. But that is a profoundly Christian and Catholic work. Well, it's been gigantically successful.
And here's what's interesting, as we talk about Mormon themes, that idea that any and or all of us can at some point function in the role of a savior for a limited thing is a very Mormon concept. And we are very comfortable with that. It's the idea of a spiritual salvation that we as non-gods, as non-special beings, can bring to other people. That is incredibly powerful to broad audiences, because it's not really part of the doctrine of traditional Christianity, but it is part of ours. And that's part of why Mormon themes are incredibly powerful in larger fiction. There's an author named Lee Allred, I can't think of the name of the title. Are any of you all familiar with the Draka anthologies? Nietzschean horror. Okay? The darkest of the dark, the abyss looked back type stuff. Aliens that come and destroy humanity because they can. My friend Lee wrote a story for the Draka anthology based entirely on the last part of the Book of Mormon. Because in the Book of Mormon, what happens to the good people? They die.
After they become bad.
But are they gone? They're not gone. The restoration can still occur. He took the darkest possible subject matter, applied Mormon themes to it, and rescued the death of virtue with the idea that there can be a restoration because some remnant of humanity goes off to another planet and can come back with the truth and the power. Again, there's just so much stuff that you can do there. It's been a lot of fun.
Do you guys remember Battlestar Galactica?
Yeah.
You had the Quorum of 12, you had Cobalt.
Oh, the first
you
one
had
was so...
Eternal Marys. And then you had these angelic beings that say, as you are, we once were, and as you are, or as we are, you may become.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And that leads us kind of into our next point, which is, where's kind of the line? If you are writing, maybe, I know my audience is not only LDS. I have, many more readers who are not LDS than who are, and that's probably true of some of you as well.
I think all of us.
All of you as well.
We all write for general audiences.
Yeah. I think so. I think the question then is, what's the line? Where's the line between being too heavy-handed or borrowing too heavily, and where's the balance? Using those without being heavy-handed. And I'm not saying necessarily that they are. I'm just saying, for you personally, where are your lines?
I'll go ahead and start. I will not put words in the mouth of God. God is never a character in my stories, because that's a line that I don't feel comfortable crossing. That's pretty much the line I don't feel comfortable crossing.
I got my head around that one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I kind of feel bad now.
Because, well, yeah, and that's just a personal thing, right?
No, that's tricky. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
like,
for
like,
sure.
it's you got to get to a cocky place where you're like, I own this guy, I own this character.
And that's the funny thing about it. I'll go ahead and create godlike characters. I don't care.
Right, yeah, that's different. It's like,
God.
this is...
And that is a very personal thing, right? Because we all have individual lines where we won't go past that because we don't feel comfortable. But for me, anything in our doctrine and frankly in our culture and our history is absolute fair game.
Oh, and there's so much good stuff.
Oh, there is so much glory. Someone once talked about the idea of let's put together a story about Mormon Hasidim, Hasidic Jews, right? The Wailing Wall and all that. Right. Is there a Mormon Hasidim? Well, of course there is. The holier than thous? Are you kidding me? Do we know about these people? Oh yeah, some of us are them.
In Georgia, we call them Utah Mormons.
I grew up in the Chicago area, so when I first moved here, wowee, the culture shock was extraordinary. It just about killed me. But lines. Again, I don't write stories that are explicitly Mormon in the sense of having characters or representations of doctrine of doctrine as Mormon doctrine. So I think the ideas are absolutely wide open and ripe for plucking and modifying within a frame. Now, me being me, I can't write a story that I don't believe is fundamentally true. And because I am who I am, again, that means that when I write dragons, their worldview looks an awful lot like mine, even though they're magical beings that I don't think exist. But why couldn't they exist? Why couldn't God create dragons?
Seraphim.
Is concept of dragon eternal? I don't know. Why not?
Well, King James translators thought that,
Right. That's what I'm saying is can you get there from here? Of course you can get there from here. Now, that's not doctrine, that's storytelling. That's okay. We can do that here.
Well, like if you're LDS and you think at all about what we talk about and learn about in church and in the scriptures, your mind will sometimes go to very speculative places where you wonder. And a fun way to explore some of that is with like fiction. That's licensed to go like those speculative places that might not be appropriate in a gospel doctrine class at church, or maybe depending on the group or whatever.
California, it's over there.
And it's even partly how we frame it, right? Because if you're in gospel doctrine class and you frame it as this is something I wonder about, that's a little different than if you try to preach it as doctrine. But but as a fiction writer, you have all sorts of license to like dramatize these ideas, right? To speculate. Like you're rewarded for speculating about interesting things, and I feel like I haven't mined the full potential of that. I have a couple plans for things where I will mine that a little more. But that's looking in the future. The way I currently mine that, and the way I currently kind of look for those lines, is for me, my characters are young and they're growing up, and so they're learning some of the basic lessons of life about, for example, in Fablehaven, I have the character Seth, who's learning that his reckless personality needs to sometimes learn rules are there for a reason. And you don't necessarily have to always reinvent the wheel. Sometimes those rules were there because someone smarter than you made them. You know what I mean? And by obeying them, they can be good. And so that we don't err on the side of being too much a rule follower, we have Kendra learning the opposite lesson, right? Kendra is, she's very much a rule keeper, and she's learning that, well, there's sometimes when the rule doesn't get the job done. And there's sometimes when we have to take a risk or break a rule for a higher purpose or for a higher cause or for something that's more important.
The Leononas versus the Iron Rodders. Oh.
Yeah, kind of, right? Yeah. And so, but to me, that's a universal thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like it applies to us in our culture, but it's also universal of learning when do I break rules or when do I follow rules, and is there something that's always right? And maybe there's not something that's always right. Maybe the circumstances dictate different things to different people at different times, and like there's not like a single right answer to that, but I can dramatize kids wrestling with those things and get some truth across with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is how we authentically represent truth without being didactic, is by that honest exploration of inherent ethical questions. You know, what is the right thing to do in that situation? What is the right thing for that character in that situation? Honestly exploring that is both joyous as a writer and also, I think, incredibly revelatory as we...
And one of the fun things about writing in the genres, right, is that we can go ahead and exaggerate certain things nearly to the breaking point in order to expose a particular conceptual nut that we really want to chew on. And that's one of the fun things that we can do, because we don't have to follow the rules of mundanity. We can be as weird as we want to be.
Yeah. You can build a world around a point you want to make.
Around an idea that you want to explore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of it, is, again, yeah.
So, as I see it, I think Joseph Smith brings us two major revelations that are each incomplete on its own terms. The Book of Mormon, you read it, and it says, there is more, and you can have it, but you have to be ready, and you have to master the content in this one first. And we got it 188 years ago.
And
We suck.
haven't gotten that sealed section back yet, have we?
And when Joseph endowed Brigham, similarly, he said, this is incomplete. This is not yet finished. This is incomplete. It's the best we have for now. And lest anyone think that I'm orthodox, the wrong word. I'm not a doubter. I'm not a skeptic. I believe in the authenticity of those revelations. I do. And I wouldn't say that in most conventions, but here's the thing. We have the illusion that we know people like Alma or Nephi as men of action, right, as preachers. We don't. We know them in one capacity only. What is it? We know them as writers. That's it. Well, Isaiah, all of those guys, we know them as writers. We only know Jesus in the scriptures because a writer comes and talks about it, right? So when you take up your pen to write a story, you are, as a Mormon, or you are entering a very fraught and very exciting field. You are entering a land of great revelation that is not complete. And there's an adventure for you to seek to find additional map through, right? How can we move forward as a people? I don't mean just Mormons. I mean as people towards the rest of the revelation. There's a perennial debate, not perennial, the last 30 or 40 years. Why are there so many damn Mormon science fiction writers, right? And there are all kinds of answers. Here's one, I think. Not to say the other answers don't have truth too, but look, fantasy, especially, is the what-if literature of human spirituality. And I think there are a lot of Mormons drawn to it because we have a lot of things to say. And that's why I think it's so important that people exposed to the legacy of Joseph Smith, steeped in it, are wrestling with these issues and getting beyond just saying, obey, do your home teaching, whatever, right? Be uncorrelated, seek a prophetic mantle, be a writer like Nephi.
All right, well, our time is just flying along, so we should probably take some questions and see what folks would like to know.
Shane.
So the biggest thing for me is language and books. There's so much smut out there these days when you try to read something, and bad language. And I mean, I'm trying to read some book and there's too many F words. I just put it down. I mean, and so how do you guys deal with that? I'm sure you guys. I don't know if you have any or not. I don't think. What I've read of you guys use really good language. So how do you use sparingly bad words or not at all, or how do you do that?
I'm a lucky man
Well, you're doing kids.
on this issue because since my category is middle grade, I'm heavily encouraged by my publishers to
And because
keep it
Shadow
appropriate.
Mountain is in the mix.
Yeah. I mean, whenever Shadow Mountain's in the mix,
Right.
it's easy peasy on that stuff, right? Like they're pushing hard for it. But I've published more without Shadow Mountain than with, and every publisher in this category, middle grade category, is pushing me to not have drinking, not have substance abuse, not have swearing, because they want it to be accessible for a 5th grade classroom. We're trying to serve a certain kind of audience, right?
To borrow from Jim Walton, no sex and a happy ending.
Yeah, and so like for that I'm grateful because that matches me. But I will say this, and you mark me on it, right? Like if and when, which is probably going to happen, I do some adult stuff. I don't feel like I have to put anything in there that's not what I want in there. You know what I mean? Because I'm the author, and it's like there may be, even if there is like a convention to use like a convention, the thing it's not a convention is not a necessity, right? And if I'm the author of the book, I can still make it feel darn gritty and darn hard hitting without certain language. It's a lot more powerful actually to use the kind of details that really like make you freak out, and it's a lot less intimidating to say an F-bomb than it is to give some descriptions that I could think of. You know what I mean? Like that would be like, yikes, this guy's a psycho, don't let him write for kids. You know what I mean? I got it in me, I could. Like you glimpse it in my fiction. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you have to realize too that sometimes, even in, and this isn't always true, but sometimes in a lot of those books, those words are a shortcut anyway. And so you can write powerful fiction without them if it is authentic to your voice. Now, if it is not, that's okay too. But I wouldn't let anyone tell you you have to have it in order to be a successful writer.
And that's the thing, right? Because of who I am, I have zero problem with going anywhere. I just published a story about a genetically damaged stripper, for crying out loud.
The Book of Mormon has a story about cannibal rape.
Right?
Its first hero beheads an unconscious man after listening to voices in his head.
Yeah.
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 Laban.
There's some intense stuff. Yeah.
Be fine. But the thing is that because again of who I am, I don't necessarily conceive stories in terms of particular words. I find most profanity to be impolite as opposed to immoral, with the one rather notable exception about taking the name of deity in vain.
I'm totally with you. And by the way, I don't think publishers, I think it's a rare and weird publisher that would push you to add.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, you can't gain readers. There's no amount of super creative and cool profanity that will sell more books. But you can, and I say this as a guy, I have cussing. I'm with Scott. I think it's impolite. I've read scriptures rather thoroughly. I don't think that heaven cares too much, except that I don't want to offend people. Right. So, unless you got some weird niche little publisher, they're not going to say, hey, amp up the cussing.
I've dropped exactly one F-bomb in a story, and it was the difference between effing and making love.
So it was a point.
So it was a concept that I was trying to deliver that required that jar to make the point I was trying to make. But that's because, again, you don't need it. Now, violence happens. But you decide. It's your story, it's your worldview, you decide.
Yeah.
There's audience for whatever it is that you're writing.
And do remember, at the end of the day, your name's on it.
Yeah, it's your name.
You know what I mean? And so I think about that. Like my name's on it, and what do I want my name on?
You're reading karma, man. You gotta be careful with that.
Yeah. In so many ways, right? Like that's thematically, that's language, it's
Exactly.
whatever, right?
Exactly.
And so as one of the questions you need to ask yourself is, am I cool with my name being on it? You know what I mean? Like, and if you're cool with it, you'll have a happier life.
My first signing, I was ready to sign. I mean, I was ready to sign for lots of adults because my work was, in that category. I had a 12-year-old come up and was so excited. This is great. Can I get this? And for me, in that moment, it was important for me to be able to say, yeah, you can read this, And so that's my voice. That's what's important to me. We have a couple more questions.
Yeah, just like in X-Files, Scully's Catholic, and in Dresden Files, Michael Carpenter's Catholic. You have all of these Catholic characters, and nobody picks up that book and says, "Oh, you got to be Catholic to read this."
Right.
Where are the Mormon characters
Monster Hunter.
similar like that?
There's a Mormon character in Larry's stories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it
Milo.
Milo? Yeah, it's Milo.
Yeah.
Monster Hunter International's got a Mormon in it.
Well, his other book does too. I mean, John Browning's in this.
Well, yes, Touche. Yes, also Grimoire.
See, that's the funny thing is because I think part of the question is naming the character as Mormon just as a fact of their existence, right? I'm tall. I have gray hair. I am Mormon. It's a thing that doesn't have to then dominate the story or be a thematic, a foreground thematic element.
Although, as I recall, in one of the books, doesn't Milo like repel a vampire or something?
Yeah.
In a Mormon fashion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
With his faith, because in his, mythology or whatever, it's the faith of the person that's actually what's repelling it. It's not the fact that, oh, it's a cross.
Yeah.
Or, oh, it's holy water.
Oh, you
It's
mean-
the faith that the person has for that
In the
symbol
cross or in the water.
that is
Yes.
what's repelling it.
You mean the brother of Jared who sees the finger of God because his faith was so great, the finger of the Lord, that he himself penetrated the veil and saw that which was
could not
true.
be kept outside,
I
yeah.
hadn't thought of it that way, but
Right.
it's probably a similar notion.
We can do that because guess what we believe?
You know what, though? I think we're still waiting for our Chaim Potok, right? Someone who can write a story that is
Who writes the culture? Yeah.
that is just really Mormon, and
It's been done.
and it hits an audience like My Name Is Ash or whatever.
Monster Hunter Nemesis is practically verbatim Mormon doctrine.
Okay, well, I have not read that far, so.
There you go.
And this is a footnote, there's a fair amount of cussing in that series.
So we have a couple of, there were some
Yeah, talk to Larry.
polite hands over here.
Fine.
Did you have something? Yeah.
Yeah, a couple comments. One on the profanity. I did, and this is my personal rule, I won't use profanity, and if I feel that I have to use it, I'll make something up.
Yeah, that's a way around it if you want to, right?
I'll follow I'll go the red dwarf route.
I construct sentences so that they do not require profanity. Because I'm an author, it's what I do. Right? And that's
And, sorry,
second.
one other point that I thought was with Mormon characters or anything, Tom Clancy included a Mormon character in Hunt for Red October. He didn't do anything special with him, just was Mormon, and he, from what I was able to read, behaved like a Mormon.
And there is a better than even chance that someone working in intelligence either is or knows a Mormon.
Better than.
Better than, yeah.
70%.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the non-Mormon writers are less afraid to include Mormon characters than we are, because we're thinking that we're going to be pushing our faith on somebody if we do it, whereas they're looking at it as a shortcut to describe this character. If he's a Mormon, that means he has certain characteristics, like if he's a Boy Scout.
Bob Heinlein wrote some of the best Mormon characters out there, right?
Robert Heinlein had some characters in there.
There's, I think it's one of Piers Anthony's tarot books that quotes 2nd Nephi, as I recall.
Yeah.
Is being a Mormon a TV trope on the site?
Do you have a question?
I was just wondering how you deal with characters doing things in the story that we, as Mormons, find immoral or wrong, and
Yes,
how you
that
avoid
happens.
how do you avoid presenting that as acceptable and right?
By not presenting it as acceptable and right.
Yeah, there's a question, because like the girl with the dragon tattoo stuff,
Yeah.
which gets so many pats in the back for being feminist, whatever. I watched the first one. I thought, this is like a sick porn. These guys like this. This is not pro-woman, except ostensibly they're reveling in horrible details of assaults and stuff. So I think it's all how you present it.
Are you glorifying it or are you not?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to be disrespectful with the comment, but seriously, if bad people do bad things, antagonists don't always follow the rules. And sometimes you need to demonstrate through action, and you can decide what level of detail.
Yeah.
That this is not a good thing. And if you have people doing bad things and receiving awards, well, guess what? That happens in real life too.
I think the reaction of your point of view character is gonna tell the reader how to think about this. Think about Darth Vader's entry. Okay, the first time we see Darth Vader, he walks on the screen and he kills a dude with his bare hands, right? And it's scary. Everyone else around is nervous and uncomfortable. And then we feel like Darth Vader is a badass for 3 movies, though he does nothing. He just walks around the first thing we saw him do was kill a dude with his bare hands. And if you had made that funny, right? If it was like a Quentin Tarantino Star Wars, and it was I think it would have had a totally different impact. It would have been an act of glorification. It would have been look how cool this guy is, as opposed to look how horrible he is and scary.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Context matters, right?
Yeah,
The way
and
you
I would
present it.
and I would say look at connotation of your words as well. Look at your word choice and be very careful with your connotation. In addition, I'm getting the eye from Aaron back here.
I'm the bad guy. Thank you, everybody, and thank you